Hey everybody, Bryant back with another stimulating conversation. Genuinely, you'll need stimulants for this conversation. Drink some coffee, do some jumping jacks. This is the thing in the industry we all tend to avoid, but the piece collectively our entire team talks about. We know for a fact, no matter how great we were at our craft, no matter how great we were at our art, we were not profitable and we were not impactful until we understood the importance and the breakdown of the P&L. So you've got to have art, but you also got to have a little bit science to be successful in this arena. So we're going to do a cursory overview, just a very simple contextual understanding of the P&L, how it works, why it's so important, and what you can do with great data and how you can make really, really critical improvements really fast to impact profitability. So instead of putting you to sleep with an eye chart or a spreadsheet, we're just going to do kind of a visual here of the dollar. This is every dollar that goes into your till and how it's rationally broken down. This is based on information across the entire landscape of the restaurant industry. So don't worry if this doesn't benchmark against how you're performing. This is big, huge national chain business and independents, quick service, full service, fine dining, etc. So just a very generic overview so that you understand the way the money flows. So at the top, we have our number one expense historically, which is our cost of food and beverage. Now notice this isn't cost of goods. This is the predictable consumable product that we measure according to recipe. Cost of goods, things that aren't consumable, we put into a different bucket. So after our food and beverage cost, we have our labor cost. These two pieces collectively represent what is called prime cost. And if you've heard somebody bat that term around, now you know what it is. These two pieces combined, which represent anywhere from 55 to 65 cents on the dollar for every restaurant. It is your largest burden of expense in the entire restaurant. So that's why this is the most critical number to know. Next, you've got another percentage carved out for what is your variable expense. This is money that you're going to spend, but it may not always be predictable to the amount. If we're in a shortfall or a deficit or sales aren't doing what we need to, we could cut back a little bit on marketing. Maybe. I don't know that I'd recommend that, but we can cut back in different spots. We can control elements like how we're managing our utilities, turning the lights on and off, stuff like that. It's going to have an incremental change, but all of those things that can be modified or adjusted live in this bucket. And then really the fixed cost, that's rent, occupancy cost. That's the thing that's probably not going to change unless you're on a percentage of sales rent agreement or lease agreement. And then finally, what we've all been waiting for, the profit. And I'm sure a lot of folks that have tuned in are looking at this number and saying 12%, oh my God, I'd be so happy to have 12%. Well, here's the bad news. Again, this is on aggregate. This is big, huge national chains, some of the most profitable business, and independents, some of the least profitable business. It's worth noting that these big national chains have incredible efficiencies in science, and they practice this stuff to death. And because of it, they're making double the profit of what the average independent is. So we want to talk about why. We want to capture those processes that other people have invested in and paid a ton of money for and hand them off to the independents out there so that they can be as impactful and more profitable. So with that, let's dive into the high level of how a P&L works and why and what it does. So we start with our balance sheet, and balance is just literally revenue and expenses, right? So within the revenue expenses, those should all come out to zero, or they should match, and what's left over is the gross profit. That part is just to tell you that all of that is the data that ends up flowing into the P&L statement or the profit and loss statement. There's two different types of P&Ls that are referred to commonly. There is the summary, which is just a high-level snapshot. It's got a lot of buckets beneath it that have all been condensed to just some high-level numbers. And then we have what's called the detailed P&L, and that has all the minutia. So when we see a red flag on the summary, we want to dive in and figure out why is it or why didn't it perform the way that we thought it would. And the outcomes that we're looking for with a P&L and the critical importance of a P&L is it gives us the opportunity to analyze what happened. And from there, we can identify trends. We can start to use these predictable trends to inform budgeting. And we can actually train and teach our staff to work on a budget hey, this is how much money you have to spend on food, on labor, on drinks, because of what we're forecasting in sales that have been predictable and tracked and captured. After that, we have exceptions. We can easily identify exceptions. We had a busload of people come in. We wanted to note that so we don't put it into next week's budget. We had some shortfall with product because it wasn't ordered, it was out of stock, and we had to go source it in a different place, and that spiked our cost. We want to outline those exceptions so that we're not building it into next week's predictability, next month, next period, or whatever. So here's a basic snapshot of a P&L. You can see it captures the sales, so there's the revenue, and then we start deducting from the revenue all of our expenses, starting with our food and beverage cost, then looking at our labor cost, and all of those other variable and fixed expenses, until we get to the green line, which shows our profitability. Now, what the big guys do, and what they do very well, is their expansion of every one of these categories. These categories are called a GL code or a general ledger code. And you can type in general ledger code and you can see a standard chart of accounts. And that tells you how you should rationalize everything that you have for an expense and for revenue. Every concept is a little bit different. We can help you with that to build that. We actually really enjoy doing that. And at a customized level, it'll really help you find what you need to know about your specific business. So this is the concept of the P&L. We can get into more of a deep dive, but here's what's so critical about having a P&L. Number one, it has to be timely. We can't respond to something that happened 4 weeks ago. And I hear operators say all the time, whether it's an operator, manager, chef, owner, well, it took my accounting company 4 weeks to settle the books to get me the info back. I'm not going to tell you that's all right, because here's what I could do. I could take an Excel spreadsheet. I could ask you how much you pay for rent. I could put that down. I could say, hey, people clock in on your computer. How many people clocked in times what their wage was? I know your labor. I can look at your invoices on your food and your beverage, and I can know how much you spent. I can go to the POS and I can find out what your revenue was for that period of time. I can capture all the critical elements relative to a P&L to make my own and not have to wait or have this crutch of 3 weeks waiting on the accounting company. I have to have this in a timely way so that I can respond. That's the most critical element of the P&L. Now, second to timeliness is accuracy. And that goes back to how you rationalize your general ledger codes. They're super, super important. And we can get a little bit nerdy on this, but once you start farming through this data and start finding out these really cool detective skills that you have, like, oh my gosh, here's where this money went and here's why, and I know how to fix it. There's nothing more rewarding than that, because you're putting money in your pocket, and that's fantastic. And of course, again, it leads to budgeting, and all of this is really critical and important, and something that we'd love to sit down with you and help you develop if you don't have it. So the last piece within this puzzle is the comparative value. So budgeting leads us to a forecasted P&L. We can fill this out and say, based on historical trend, this is what we think we're going to do in revenue, sales, expense, fixed expense. And then once we actually get the results back, we can go compare this side by side, and we can see what the variance was. And then we can drill down on the variance to figure out why. Super, super insightful, helps you be fluid, and most importantly, it helps you be profitable. Now, when it comes to profit and loss, I guess there's a high-level hack that we'd like to give you, because sometimes when we think that we have a profit problem, we might actually have a sales problem, and vice versa. So here's kind of a cool little rule of thumb. If your rent is more than 7% of your total sales, you don't have a profit problem. You have a sales problem. This bell curve of covering your nut, covering your fixed expense, is dictated by capturing the right ratio of revenue. So if you're greater than 7% rent to sales or greater than 10% total occupancy cost, you've got to drive sales before we can actually start to figure out what the profitability efficiencies need to be. We'll be behind the 8 ball the whole time. Now, if you are less than 7% rent to sales, at or less than 10% total occupancy cost, and you're still not profitable, then we start looking at the mechanisms of profit and figuring out where it's leaking and where we need to close some gaps and plug some holes. So just a cool little hack. Love that number when I learned it. Helped change a lot of things for me. So here's the deal. As always, complimentary, free consultation, 30 minutes. we could do a deep dive with you. All you got to do is jump on shamrockfoodservice.com, go over to the resources tab, click on the consultant tab, and just fill out the form. It gets auto sent to us really quick. We jump back, we schedule a call, and we talk about specifically what it is that you'd like to cover, and hopefully that has a great impact for you. Thanks a ton for tuning in. Hope this was helpful. Talk to you soon.